The first game I want to talk about is Horizon Forbidden West. So as of now, the sequel to one of PS4's best games in my opinion doesn't have a release date, but I'm quite confident we will see it in 2021 despite not having seen any gameplay footage as of yet. Now, 2017's Horizon Zero Dawn I thought was fantastic. When you look at the basic layout of the game, I mean it was quite a by the numbers open world game, and I think the public consensus is that it suffered a bit by releasing almost exactly the same time as Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game that almost redefined the open world action RPG, and having never actually played it myself, you can take those words to the bank. But I remember at the time a lot of critics suddenly thought Horizon maybe looked a bit basic in comparison. These two games had quite a lot of similarities on paper, but Zelda had all these ingenious systems that were at play at any given time. You could do anything in any order you wanted to, approach any encounter or puzzle in a dozen different ways. And then there was Horizon on the other side, which was suddenly seen as just a kind of really pretty diorama in comparison. Now, I can't really comment on the Zelda comparisons. Like I said, I've not played Zelda. I still really want to, by the way, but I'm not buying a Switch just to play one game. But Horizon's combat was anything but basic, and that's what set it apart for me. Most people probably know Horizon's developer Guerrilla used to do the Killzone games. Fairly boring, straightforward shooters, but really pretty and with really good controls. Horizon was their first shot in an open world game, and they just knocked it out of the park. They took those looks and controls of Killzone and actually made an interesting game out of it with, robot dinosaurs. What more could you want? As amazing as it looked, it wasn't the open world that set Horizon apart for me though. It was the tension and variety and the different combat encounters that worked so well. There were so many different enemy types, and they had all these moving parts to them which could affect the battle in a split second. You would vary your approach for different types of enemies as well. I mean, you'd set a tripwire to get a certain type of enemy to charge at you. Different ones had like lighter fluid on their backs, you shoot that out and that'd kill like a whole herd of them. I remember the best, or the most formidable one anyway, was the Thunderjaw, which was basically a T-Rex. That had this disc launcher on its back which dealt you like massive damage, but you could actually shoot that off if you had the right ammo, pick that up and then cause massive damage on aforementioned Thunderjaw. You could also do one of my favourite things in games too, which is to turn enemies against each other. You could get to a point where you could essentially hack any of the robot dinosaurs in the game that you wanted, and it could completely turn the tide in your favour. And all these encounters, they just happened organically within the world too. They weren't like scripted or anything, they felt like it though. They were just so dynamic. Chances are though you're familiar with Horizon. What do we know about Forbidden West then? Not much really. As I said, there's not been any gameplay released at this point. It'll be on the same engine as Zero Dawn though, as that engine was purpose built for that game. I imagine this one will look and play very similarly, which I'm fine with because Zero Dawn's gameplay was pretty unique and it's still one of the best looking games out there. There's going to be water sections in this one too, so yes. Guerrilla have promised dozens more species of robot to fight, and there's friendly and hostile human tribes like in the last game. Now while I loved Zero Dawn, it wasn't perfect. Speaking of those human tribes, while fighting the robots was fantastic, fighting the humans was anything but, man. It felt really imprecise. The AI was pretty dumb, and any time that I fire an ammo right in a guy's face and he doesn't die, it takes me completely out of it. That happened all the time in Horizon. So I hope that's been improved. I was hoping fighting humans had just been taken out altogether, to be honest, but it doesn't look like that's the case. I would like there to be a bit more interactivity in the open world too, and maybe just a slightly more fun way of getting around as opposed to just running or being on robot horseback. I mean, I'd say I'd quite like to have a grappling hook, but then I don't want a wee grappling hook icon to clutter the UI all the time too. You never know, maybe this one will have a dinosaur in the shape of a car, we can drive that. I hope the story grips me a bit more this time too. Now you know me, the story's not that important to me, but Zero Dawn actually had a really good story tucked away there, but for me it was kind of sold short and hampered in the way it was told. So much of the story played out as you were wandering about these caves and like playing holograms, and while that hologram's playing you've just got to kind of walk about fidgeting. They can never really hold my attention, to be honest. It was only after I beat the game and read into the story more that I appreciated it. So I wouldn't mind there being a few more kind of traditional cutscenes this time around. and maybe just do mainly audio tapes instead of holograms, so you could listen while you're exploring, like in something like Bioshock or Arkham Asylum. And Aloy's the only character I can really remember from the first game too, Aloy the main character. It wasn't exactly the most memorable cast. I mean, even Aloy was a bit dull. I mean, she was fine, she didn't get on my nerves or anything, which is a victory in itself, and I quite liked how calm and subdued she was at times during a lot of the game, but I wouldn't say she exactly oozed charisma, you know. Maybe give her a more interesting cast of characters to bounce off would help. But these are pretty small complaints. The main thing that's tempered my excitement a bit for this game is that it's actually going to be on PS4 as well, which means no matter how Sony try and spin it, it won't really be utilising the PS5's full power. If Miles Morales is anything to go by, the PS4 versus PS5 differences will be pretty minor. I imagine the PS5 will have faster loading times and slightly better graphics, but I don't think it'll be that generational leap, and in turn it might leave PS5 owners feeling, I don't know, a wee bit shortchanged. Gotham Knights. I was a bit unsure on whether to put Gotham Knights on this list or not. There's games that are coming out in 2021 that I'm not talking about today, which I think could probably end up being better, like Ratchet & Clank and Resident Evil 8, but I don't really have much interesting to say about those games, but I do have some thoughts and opinions on Gotham Knights, so let's dive in. Even though I'm not that clued into the whole superhero craze that we're all living in, I've got no problem saying that Batman, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City are two of my very favourite games of all time. So anything that shares even a bit of those games' DNA will pique my interest. Now, Gotham Knights is being developed by WB Montreal, who made the kind of black sheep of the Arkham games, Arkham Origins. It's still a fine game, even though it did have its problems. So this isn't technically the next big game from the Arkham Asylum studio, that's Kill the Justice League, I believe. And I've got to say, there's quite a bit about this game that looks pretty off-putting to me. There's been a trailer and a gameplay demo shown so far, and at first glance it looks like they've almost taken that Arkham engine and put it into an MMO or something. So, in Gotham Knights, Batman is presumed dead, so we're taking control of his friends like Nightwing, Batgirl and Robin to kind of carry the torch. The game's premise being that doing that Predator stealth and free flow combat that you love so much in the Arkham games, but doing it all co-op this time and being able to talk to your pals while you're at it. It's the kind of thing that if I'd thought about in my head like 10 years ago, it would sound amazing, but unfortunately in the last 10 years or so, we've seen that proof of concept, and it turns out those kind of things aren't exactly for me. Now, the first time I watched this gameplay demo a few months ago, I was thinking, oh man, this looks so stupid. They've still got that Arkham free flow combat, but every enemy has a level icon above their head, and I think it's literally the exact same icon as they use in Assassin's Creed Odyssey as well. And just like that game, it looks like every enemy is this unrealistic damage sponge. I could just imagine trying to do, the signature inverted takedown on a guy, but not being allowed to because he's too high a level, or you do it and it only takes up a bit of his health, so you bounce off him. It'd be completely dumb. And then the demo got to a boss battle with Mr. Freeze, and I could see two human players just wailing on Mr. Freeze with numbers flying out of him like Destiny. I mean, I'm no Batman purist or anything, but that doesn't seem very Batman to me. Compare that Mr. Freeze fight to the one in Arkham City, where he had to stay out of his line of sight and use different stealth takedowns every time because he kept learning your moves. I mean, that seems a lot closer to Batman's detective nature to me. So I'm not a big fan of online co-op and level gating and that kind of thing. But what I need to remember is that this isn't really part of the Arkham series at all. It doesn't follow on from Arkham Knight, it's a completely new story. This isn't the main developer of that series, they're just trying something a bit different. And while I'm not a big fan of games as a service, by the way, I just want to say how much I hate that term. Do you know how stupid it sounds when you say this game is a games as a service? Just call it a service game. Why aren't we calling these service games? Anyway, while I'm not a big fan of service games, this might not quite be as bad as I first feared. For one thing, Gotham Knights has a maximum of 2 players. I could just imagine if it was 4 player, just non-stop explosions, lag and glitching everywhere. That one dickhead on your team that ruins every stealth section by just charging in, but I mean, since it's only 2 player, there's maybe a chance for a bit of cohesion. They said you can also play through the whole game on your own, but I mean, I'm sure you can, but I kind of imagine playing this game on your own would just be like playing a much worse version of the Arkham games, so I doubt that'll be very tempting. But I mean, it's an open world game too, so hopefully you've at least got a chance to just cruise around the city. I mean, Batgirl's motorbike looked quite fun. Maybe you can just do odd jobs wandering about on your own if you want. Maybe that means they're able to include Riddler trophies as well. I think I'm one of the few people that actually really like them. But since it's open world, at least it's not like Destiny or Avengers where you're on that menu selecting like a mission to go on. I don't really like that. But I'm sure that just like those games, this will come with an equally baffling pre-order roadmap. Something else that kind of changed my mind in the last few months was actually Ghost of Tsushima Legends. See, Ghost of Tsushima has its similarities with the Arkham games: fun combat system, stealth, open world. And I tried out Legends, the online co-op mode where you're doing a lot of the things that seem to be the meat of Gotham Knights, and I actually really enjoyed it. Of course, the caveat being that I'd already played and enjoyed 40 hours of single player story in Ghost of Tsushima, and Legends was just a free bonus really that they gave us a few months down the line, but still, I'm a bit more enthusiastic about Gotham Knights than I was at first, so I'll see how reviews go and maybe give that a shot. AEW Game.Why? I don't know, it's not got a title, let's just call it AEW No Mercy. Now, this one probably won't come out this year, to be honest. I almost hope it doesn't, as that would indicate they're taking their time on it, for a sign of quality, but it's been stated that a 2021 release is possible. A lot of folk probably wouldn't have a wrestling game as one of the most wanted games of the year, but this one's got me pretty intrigued. I'm a pretty big wrestling fan, more for all the drama and politics and behind the scenes stuff than what you see on actual TV. I mean, I'd watch Bret Hart shooting on the business for half an hour over pretty much any actual wrestling match, but I do like AEW. It's pretty much the only wrestling I do watch these days, and I'm hopeful for this game for one reason: Kenny Omega. Kenny Omega is arguably the biggest name in AEW. He's their current world champion at the time of writing, and he's, like a lot of today's wrestlers, he's a proper nerd too, which is great. Like a lot of us, Kenny's a big fan of the old N64 wrestling games, mainly the AKE games. So AKE were a studio who were responsible for WCW NWO World Tour, WCW NWO Revenge, WWF WrestleMania 2000, and WWF No Mercy, amongst others. Most people point to WWF No Mercy as the pinnacle. I mean, my personal favourite was WCW NWO Revenge, but you really can't go wrong with any of these. They're some of the very best games on the system, full stop, and they've aged a lot better than the traditional classics like GoldenEye and Ocarina of Time. Mr. Omega actually took the job at AEW, with one of the criteria being that he'd be involved in the gaming division. And whenever I've heard him talk about what he wants from a modern wrestling game, I'm just kind of sat nodding my head in full agreement. He wants something that feels like No Mercy, but understands that there need to be some sort of evolution if you want to accurately represent the moveset of a guy like Rey Fenix. You see, for the last 20 years or so, pretty much the only wrestling games we've had on modern systems have been the WWE 2K games, formerly known as the SmackDown games, and these games are terrible. Even before 2K20 became this laughingstock for all its glitches, the games were rubbish before that. The SmackDown games on the PS2 and PS3 were a little better, but even at their peak, I would never score them higher than like a 6 out of 10. The games always had really bad glitchy animations and collision detection. There was never really any sense of weight, momentum or dynamism to the games. And they went from way too fast to way too slow, and we're on about the 20th game in the series now, and you can still spot wee animations from like the very first game in today's game. And the AI's constantly just been some of the worst in the business. The amount of reversals you get were totally game breaking. I mean, I could go on, but this is why I was happy when I read this quote from Kenny Omega. So we've needed a new wrestling game with a brand new engine for a good while. I was a bit put off a few months ago when AEW announced that it would be Yuke's that were developing the game, as it was Yuke's who were responsible for a lot of those WWE games. But Omega recently announced that they're working with the producer of WWF No Mercy, Hideyuki Geita Iwashita, in an advisory role. And Omega handpicked him himself, so he obviously really knows his stuff. I mean, I love those N64 games. I'd never heard of Geita. But Geita was part of the almost mythical AKE team who worked on all these games. They then went on to do these two Def Jam games on the PS2, which were also fantastic, but since then they changed their name to Sin Sophia, and they mainly do like rhythm games for like the 3DS and arcades nowadays. The team that did those wrestling games have pretty much disbanded, but Kenny managed to track down Gator, and luckily he was willing to help. This is yet another game that we've not seen any gameplay footage of yet. We've only seen this trailer, and it's true that the graphics don't look too great, bit of a cartoony feel to them. It's important to mention this is basically just a proof of concept footage, although I would prefer a bit more realism, but as long as the action itself is grounded in reality and feels like No Mercy, it really doesn't bother me, and I'll have a game that I'll be playing for years if they do. God of War Ragnarok. Now it's rumoured that Ragnarok will come to PS4 as well, like Horizon, but Sony are keeping their cards kind of close to their chest on that one, so hopefully that's not the case. God of War Ragnarok isn't even the official title of the follow-up to 2018's God of War. All we've seen of the game is a logo, and then there's some text saying Ragnarok is coming 2021, so there's only so much I can blag here. It's a pretty good name though. Nevertheless, from the limited info and rumours we've had, it's predicted that Ragnarok takes place 3 years after that last game, which is why they're keen to hit that 2021 release date, because that would be 3 years in real time as well, obviously. It's also a safe bet we'll still be in control of Kratos. I think it's a bit early to hand the series over to Atreus just yet, and it's pretty likely we'll see Thor at some point, whether we're teaming up with him or fighting him, obviously we don't know yet. Although we've only seen a teaser trailer for Ragnarok so far, it's rumoured that there's actually been a playable demo ready for months. There was a chance that it was going to be demoed at last year's Game Awards, but the legend goes that Sony saw the trailer for Halo Infinite at the Game Awards and realised that basically they don't need to show their hand yet because the competition just wasn't there. Considering that lots of people still can't get their hands on a PS5, it's not like they need to shift units at the moment either, so it's a pretty sensible decision. Now for a game as massive and important as God of War, 3 years seems like a pretty short space of time between releases by today's standards. I mean, consider Naughty Dog released the two Last of Us games, 7 years apart? But God of War 2018 was built on either a brand new engine or an engine that had been completely torn apart and rebuilt. So it's a bit similar to Horizon in that way. There's a lot of groundwork that was already done by that first game, and now they have that foundation. Maybe they can just have a bit more fun adding, bells and whistles to it. I don't know how game development works, maybe. Now I liked God of War 2018, but I think I would have enjoyed it more if I hadn't had everyone in the gaming industry just falling over themselves to proclaim how much of a masterpiece it was, or say how it made them a better dad, or something like that. It's a lot of people's favourite Sony exclusive on PS4. I mean, I think it was only my third favourite PS4 exclusive of that year. Shout out to Yakuza 6 and Spider-Man. They were better. I mean, it was fine, but there's nothing it really did wrong, but I don't think there's anything it really excelled at, I mean, a lot of the game was just combat, and it had a deep combat system, but it certainly wasn't perfect though. I mean, it lacked a lot of precision. Sometimes your enemies would just kind of skate across the floor to hit you, and it wasn't perfect. And when you take the combat away, well, what did you have? You had some really rudimentary platforming, you had a lot of, walking slowly while your pal's talking, carrying that boar for 2 minutes, and it was what it was. I think the only thing it really excelled at was just overall polish, which was definitely there. And I don't want to repeat the same point I make in every video, but here we go. I had a lot of the conventions that you see in modern games today, like I said, walking around at that set speed during dialogue, really simplistic platforming, really simplistic puzzles, unnecessary amounts of crafting and gear. I mean, I think you could have taken the whole leveling and RPG systems out of it and you'd have been fine. An open world without really a fun way of getting about, you only had on foot and on that rowing boat. Like I said, just an extremely polished game that I don't think really pushed the envelope in any way, not like Horizon did with its combat anyway. So I've spent the last couple of minutes shitting on God of War. Here's what I'm looking forward to. I don't know. It's not like I absolutely can't wait for God of War to arrive obviously, but I'm sure I'll enjoy it when it does, especially if they make a few improvements, a bit more variety in the combat, more interesting platforming, maybe a jet ski or something to get around. I'm not expecting a quantum leap given the relatively short development time, but hopefully something different. What I think I should do really is replay the last game on PS5 while I wait for Ragnarok. Maybe a setting run through on New Game Plus, and I think it runs on 60 FPS on the PS5. I won't have to worry so much about gear and crafting, and maybe just improving my core skill will endear me more to the game. Even then, I doubt I'll pick Ragnarok the day it comes out, but I'll definitely be picking it up at some point once the sale's hit for like £30-40 mark. And when you put this next to Horizon and Ratchet & Clank, it's looking like some year for Sony. Pro Evolution Soccer 2022. I'll keep this one short. When it was announced last summer that there would essentially be no PES 2021 and that PES 22 would be on a brand new engine, I made this video with my thoughts and hopes for 2022. It's not a great video to be honest, but it is an accurate representation of my feelings, and we've had no real new info since then. We've had this one line from Konami saying, "We will talk more about exact details at a later stage. It's worth stressing that we're rebuilding our next gen title from the ground up." So that's encouraging at least. I mean, when I first heard we'd have a new engine for PES, the first time since 2013, there was a lingering doubt in my mind that maybe it'd just be a new rendering engine or something and the core game would kind of remain untouched, but hopefully this points to the more substantial shift that we've needed for the last 2 or 3 years at least. I mean, to bullet point that video I made, I want PES 22 to have better dribbling, a reworked trick system, better animation, better lighting, especially for pitches, a deeper edit mode, not just kits and badges, an edit mode for graphics and stadiums and things like that. In an ideal world, we'd also have no microtransactions with my club either, but I'll pick my battles. Hopefully they'll just be made illegal one day, but we'll stick with it for now. But PES 22 could well be the most prevalent game on the channel this year. I'm going to even try and get an early review copy. I've never done that before, but I'll see how kind of doable it is. Regardless of that, there will be a full review on the channel like there was for 2020, so yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Mass Effect Legendary Edition. So I know this one's a bit of a cheat entry really, but the Mass Effect Legendary Edition will at least definitely come out this year. This is a collection of Mass Effect 1, 2 and 3, including all the DLC for those games. I wouldn't normally include a remaster on a list like this, but I've never actually played Mass Effect 1, I've never owned an Xbox, and the first Mass Effect game to come out on a PlayStation was Mass Effect 2 on PS3 at the start of 2011. Mass Effect 1 did eventually release digitally on PSN in 2012 after Mass Effect 3 I think, but I remember being told that it's really hard to go back to playing Mass Effect 1 after 2 and 3 improved the controls and gameplay so much, so I guess I didn't want to taint the experience in my head maybe. So even though I know the story of it, this will be my first time experiencing Mass Effect 1. I was a big fan of Mass Effect 2 and 3, especially 2, but I do think 3's a bit underrated. I mean, I love that multiplayer. Mass Effect created this whole sci-fi universe with all these different species and terminology that soon becomes second nature the more you play the game. You start to dig into those codex entries and read up on the backstory of why certain species have prejudices against another, and you get interested in what the genophage was, who the Protheans are. It's the kind of thing that people love and obsess over in the Star Wars universe, but frankly I think Mass Effect does the whole world building thing better, far better. Then there was the characters, particularly in 2. You had to build up your ragtag crew for this suicide mission, doing the loyalty missions for characters like Morden, Jack, Grunt, and I could go on. You really get attached to them. I mean, I got dead into the less significant stuff too, mining each planet for resources with that soothing music in the background, spending all my money on an aquarium for my bedroom, punching that reporter on more than one occasion. The gameplay itself was, it was functional, but it was still a lot of fun. Picking the right squad to complement yourself and the kind of species you'd be encountering on any given planet. It was a combination of that Gears of War cover shooting, which was all the rage back then, with special abilities like telekinetic powers, electrocution, stuff like that, along with that kind of mild squad tactic element that it had as well. And I'm assuming this remastered collection is going to be 60 FPS too, at least on PS5 and Series X. I mean, I'd be pretty let down if it's not. So that means that core shooting can finally feel as good as Gears of War, but with all that added Mass Effect goodness on top of it. What's not clear as of yet is if these games will all play the same. You see, Mass Effect 1, as I understand, was more of an RPG with kind of dodgy controls compared to the more streamlined and fluid 2 and 3, so I'm hoping I get a version of Mass Effect 1 that controls like 2 and 3 while still keeping those RPG elements. And it's been nearly 10 years since I beat Mass Effect 3, so I mean, after I play through 1 for the first time, I think I'm ready to play 2 and 3 again. Cyberpunk 2077. Oh, controversial. Aye, so kind of another cheat entry. Cyberpunk's already out, as you might have heard. Well, actually it's not on PSN just now, but aye, that's not the point. Now, I don't want to be an apologist for CD Projekt Red. They misled the punters like us by not providing review copies of Cyberpunk on the PS4 and Xbox One before release. And this was because the PS4 and Xbox One versions were completely unfinished and not fit to be released. And obviously I hated hearing stories of them forcing their employees to work overtime, just like Naughty Dog and Rockstar. Bang out of order, however you look at it. Even the supposed fine version on the PC was still littered with bugs. If you pay attention to gaming culture at all, I mean you'll know this already, you couldn't move for this on social media in December. The whole discourse around it was nearly as bad as Last of Us 2 from both sides. I mean, one thing I'm glad I did towards the end of last year was unfollow almost everyone in the games media on Twitter. There's room to breathe now. But anyway, I did actually manage to grab the PS4 version of Cyberpunk before Sony pulled it from PSN, and I played through the game on my PS5. Now, where to start? The game hard crashed almost every time I played it. There were missions that I couldn't finish because there were scripting errors, like you were meant to talk to, let's say, a character called Dum Dum in a club, and Dum Dum's just not there. I'm not making up that name, by the way, there was a guy called Dum Dum in the game. There was a time that I used a sniper rifle, so the game brought up a couple of extra actions on the HUD, you know, like zoom in, zoom out, D-pad, up or down. But even when I changed the weapon or restarted the game, these prompts would stay on my screen for like 2 days. And there were funny ones too, like looking in the mirror and my character didn't have any clothes or even genitals on his lower half. But I mean, it's safe to say that I encountered a bug at every corner playing Cyberpunk. And like I said, I don't want to excuse the many mistakes CD Projekt made here, but you know what? Sue me. I still really like this game. On PS5, in terms of performance, you got a pretty constant 60 FPS, at least on foot, and that made the gunplay feel brilliant. I mean, especially considering it was CDPR's first shot at a first-person shooter game. And there's proper variety in how you approach situations too. I mean, as I said, gunplay is fantastic. There was a huge variety of guns, attachments, modifiers, if you want to be like a straight shooter, but the game also had a heavy dose of Deus Ex Human Revolution in it. Augmenting your cyberwares to give you new abilities felt a lot like the Praxis kits in Deus Ex to me, and my character was built as a hacking specialist, so the majority of my combat encounters didn't even involve me firing a bullet. It was more of a case of hacking security cameras, getting turrets to kill enemies for me, hacking the enemies themselves to either attack one another, kill themselves, or just pull out a grenade or whatever. Like I said when I was talking about Horizon, one of my favourite things to do in any game is to kind of turn systems against themselves, so whether it's Cyberpunk, Deus Ex, Horizon, Bioshock, I'm always just going to lap that up. Also, like Deus Ex, nearly every area where you'd encounter combat had different options on how to approach it, so I mean if your character has a double jump, maybe you can find a way to get onto the roof and sneak through the window without anyone seeing, or maybe you've leveled up your hacking ability so you can access the secret security room that controls all the cameras and turrets. And I also really enjoyed the story, the characters, relationships, and just Night City, the setting overall. I was put off a bit when it was first announced that Cyberpunk used a first person perspective, but I really couldn't imagine playing it any other way now. Like I've said many times, I'm getting a bit sick of open world games, but I think maybe that's more of a case of Ubisoft and Sony open world games, because they just start to feel so similar and homogenised. Since we get so few CDPR games, there's something about those open worlds that still feel a bit different and fresh to me. I can't really put my finger on it to be honest, but there's just something about them that don't bore me as easily as those two. Which brings us back to this list. CDPR insist that the next gen versions will be released this year, and what have they done to make us doubt them? Well, anyway, I will get a free update to my PS4 version when it does, so if we get a PS5 version of this game that I already really enjoyed, without the hard crashes, fewer bugs, better performance, better visuals, whatever ray tracing is, and there's definitely further improvements that should be made to make good on CDPR's initial promise, like a more interactive world, better character customization, better AI, pedestrians with like proper daily routines like they did in The Witcher. I still don't think we'd quite have The Witcher 3, but I think we'd have an excellent game. And finally we've got Returnal. Might not have heard of this game. This is a brand new PS5 exclusive game, one that's coming out quite soon with an actual release date. Details are still a bit thin on the ground for it though, but we do know it's a third person roguelike shooter. To be honest, if I just saw this game on paper, probably wouldn't make such an impression on me, but I've stuck it on this list primarily because it's developed by Housemarque. Now, Housemarque are a Sony-owned development studio who have mainly done 2D arcade shooters like Dead Nation, Stormdivers, Matterfall, Nex Machina, and my personal favourite and one of the very best PS4 exclusives, Resogun. See, over the PS4 lifecycle, Housemarque became synonymous with an addictive combat loop, very tight and responsive controls, and just their overall quality really. But Returnal is their first time doing a big budget 3D game, and it's obviously quite a task to replicate that fast-paced bullet hell feeling on a 3D plane. The limited footage we've seen seems to confirm it's still very much a fast-paced action game, but it looks like there's some exploration elements too with upgradable gear, and there's a bit of horror to it as well. The fact that it's a roguelike is pretty interesting too. I mean, if you don't know, a roguelike is just every time you restart the game, the environment and enemy placement will be different. Pretty much, that's it. But one of my favourite things about Resogun was the ability to memorise a level and get really good at it, which obviously won't be possible now, but I don't have anything against roguelikes. I mean, to be honest, off the top of my head, I think the only roguelike I've actually played was Rogue Legacy, which was a platformer, but I really liked it. What did shock me a bit though, is that this is currently being listed as a full price game, and that's PS5 full price, so that's £70. There's no chance I'm paying that much for it, but I mean, I hope it doesn't hurt the game too much when it does come out, and I hope there's enough content to justify that price, but I'm hoping this one will be like one of those nice under the radar surprises. So, that's my list. Like I said, they might not all come out this year, it's even less likely I'll play them all, especially I'm playing Dark Souls just now, right, that might take me a while to beat, but this is just what's in my head at the moment. There's ones I've left out too, obviously, like I said before, Ratchet & Clank, Resident Evil 8, there's other ones like Deathloop, Back 4 Blood look quite interesting, there's obviously be some unannounced indie game that'll pique my interest as well, but I hope you've enjoyed this, thanks for sticking around till the end. If you want to leave a like or comment on the games that you're looking forward to, go for it. Cheers.